which brings me to the next question from Clive. Clive says, the tax side of the budget seems worse than the February budget. That's something I was wondering. And all that increase has been replaced with 2/3 personal income tax increase and 1/3 VAT. Professor, you were an early advocate of the VAT increase. In fact, your research paper, also published in Signals, gained some notoriety recently. Why do you think that mix has changed to have less VAT?
So let's just go to the arguments around VAT. So the standard response has been that VAT is regressive, right? And I needed to, in the Signals input, and I urge listeners to go and read that, because it's a really important statistical point, right? We shouldn't be lazy about thinking through VAT and what it means. Is that the automatic assumption is because it's a flat rate across the entire commodities universe, it has to be regressive, right? If you look at the data, right, which includes and you do a proper what is called a fiscal incidence study and includes zero rated goods, it actually turns out to be neutral across the distribution. So it's not regressive. So in fact, when you remove those commodities that the poor are intensive in consuming, it turns out that VAT is not disproportionately worse as a share of income on the poor relative to the rich. And that's a really important, and it's a fundamental point, because that was the bedrock for the arguments against a VAT increase from all parties, from the DA right through to the EFF. So, but if it's not regressive, then and you want the spending demands coming through from the SRD and the public sector wage bill, well, we have to square this somehow, right? We can't be committing 22 cents from 21.5 cents of debt service costs for every rand to 22 cents. We can't go to 25 cents. So we need to find ways in which to raise funds elsewhere. And VAT for me was clearly the most efficient and effective way to do it. Now, what was referred to in that piece as well is that perhaps there's a middle ground. So recall that the minister wanted a much bigger increase initially, and I think they settled on a 0.5 percentage point. And I think that's where the personal income tax coverage came in. And the question is exactly correct. If you look at the first year, in terms of the analysis, if you look at the first year of revenue raise, 65% of the new revenue that's going to be raised in this coming budget year is actually from personal income tax through bracket creep, purely through bracket creep. So there's no change in the brackets at all. It's just that a lot more people are now being, because of inflationary increases, moved up into higher tax brackets. 65%, right? So if you think about that, essentially we're making South Africans poorer off to pay for the new spending demands. I mean, let's be very, very clear about that. However, if you look at the full MTF period, the personal income tax proportion declines to 50%. So then it becomes more equal in terms of VAT contributing to that revenue raise, assuming we get to the second VAT increase. So I think what it does mean, and here I do worry about something called the Laffer curve. I've mentioned this in the previous Signals as well, which is as individuals, as tax rates increase, the possibility exists that the revenue you derive from further tax increases actually declines. And that's why it's called the Laffer curve. And at some point, this, let's call it an upside down U curve, is reached on the right side of that U curve. In other words, revenues start declining because people say, well, hang on, why am I paying such high taxes when in fact it's maybe not worth working? Maybe mothers who decide, or fathers who decide, well, maybe we should look after the kids ourselves, right? And you see this around the world, instead of paying such high taxes, right, in order to pay for an au pair or whatever the case may be. And so there is evidence that the last tax increase that we had at the top marginal rate did result in a decline in revenue. So one does need to keep an eye on what this bracket creep means in terms of actual revenue realized. And one does worry about the revenue raising capacity of personal income tax going forward.